Welcome to the Richard Smith MD Symposium on Cancer Care, honoring the legacy of Dr. Smith. We are grateful to his family for their continued support of this important symposium on cancer care. His wife Linda, his daughters Jenny, Lindsay, and Leslie, and also to the Good Samaritan Foundation. For the past 10 years, we have sponsored national speakers from around the country on important issues in cancer care. This year is a story of determination. The determination of researchers, the determination of doctors, the determination of those family members seeking to find answers, and also the determination of those patients. It's based on the story by Lawrence Ingrassia, who is the author of the book of Fatal Inheritance. And you will hear an important dialogue tonight with Dr. Marr, medical oncologist with the TriHealth Cancer and Blood Institute, Courtney Rice, the director of the Precision Medicine Institute, and genetic counselors here at TriHealth, as they seek to bring to light important issues in the care of patients with unique illness and disease. And we look forward to hearing more tonight, and now we'll turn it over to Dr. Marr.
I want to welcome you to our 10th Richard Smith Symposium. As Mark Whitty introduced, Larry Ingrassia is with us today, talking about a book he wrote called A Fatal Inheritance. First of all, I want to thank you for joining us, Larry. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure.
So when I read the book, I was very captured by it, how it impacted me. And we have a somewhat similar family history on my wife's side. But with your case, what inspired you to write A Fatal Inheritance?
Well, I say that this was never a book that I planned to write, but once I started it, I always knew that I was meant to write it. As you know, Dr. Marr, many families are touched by cancer, but a handful seem especially cursed, and mine's one of them. So my mother first had cancer in her 30s. She died at 42. I had two younger sisters. One died at 24, another at 32. I had a nephew who had his first cancer at age 2, and my brother, my remaining sibling, got his first cancer when he was 46. Now, my nephew and brothers both survived their first cancers, but my nephew died of his third when he was 39 after a desperate attempt to save his life by amputating his leg and his hip. And my brother died of his sixth cancer. He thought he had beaten pancreatic cancer, but it came back in his lung and it killed him in 2019. It was just like 7 months after his son died. And so, kind of throughout this, we were wondering what is going on, kind of who is going to be next, kind of why was I spared? And for a long time, doctors weren't sure. They kind of told us, well, just incredibly bad luck, perhaps, kind of there are a lot of families that have cancers and some have more cancers than others. But I just was curious to know more about this. What was this syndrome, which I eventually learned about, Li-Fraumeni syndrome, named after the two doctors who discovered it? What was it, this syndrome that had robbed me of my family? So it's put me on this journey. I call it a journey of discovery, to learn more about it, kind of what was this thing? And that was it. And kind of my book is really part memoir and part medical mystery. And it's a heartbreaking story of loss, kind of in my family and families like mine. But I also think it's an inspiring story about scientific discovery and, kind of young doctors refusing to give up. It took more than 2 decades to solve this medical mystery. And, kind of when I learned about that and what they did, I was like, somebody needs to tell this story.
Yeah, so your perspective, I think, is unique in the sense that, and we'll probably get into it here in a little bit, you talked about all the family members that have been affected, but your perspective, how did you look at health and cancer before you sort of knew the reason behind all this? How are you? Frustration? Give us sort of a
There's a mixture of a lot of emotions, Dr. Marr, a mixture of a lot of emotions. There's sadness, kind of, there's pain. Interestingly, we, kind of had a theory about what was causing all these cancers in our family. My father was a research chemist, and we thought, he must be he must have brought home for years, kind of tiny particles on his lab clothes, and, kind of somehow we ingested them and they resulted in these cancers. And so, kind of, I think people, when they don't have an answer, always search for an answer. And so that was our supposition. Of course, it turned out to be wrong, and it took a while for us to figure that out. But, kind of going through this, I think that when you're in the middle of it, and you've been in the middle of it, basically you want to kind of do whatever you can to save your family member, to make sure that they survive. You're kind of not initially focused on what was the cause, because the cause is a little bit irrelevant. I mean, not totally, but a little bit, kind of what matters most is saving. So I think it was the accumulation of these cancers that, caused a lot of puzzlement, and it caused a lot of pain, and it wasn't like one year after another. They were spread out, kind of every 5 years, even 10 years sometimes in between the cancers. So that was another reason that kind of added to a little bit of the confusion about what was going on.
And you learned that this was a hereditary cancer syndrome. So, and I think if I remember the correct portion of the book, there was a delay between when we knew this actually causes all the cancers that was occurring in your family for this specific gene, and when you actually found out. So
yeah, I think it's one of those things where kind of the knowledge sometimes takes longer for people to understand. So the story is actually a pretty amazing story. My mother died in 1968. Well, in 1967, two young doctors at the National Cancer Institute, Joseph Fraumini Jr. and Frederick Lee, came across a family, not my family, where a father who was just 23 years old at the time had leukemia, and his 10-month-old son had a soft tissue cancer in his arm. Now, either one of these would have been, kind of the odds would be very high against it. The fact that it was in this same family was, kind of the odds are really astronomical against that. And so they were curious. And this is one of the things I learned about, kind of a lot of science and how it advances, is that it requires a lot of curiosity and determination by researchers. They began looking into this family, and they found that it was riddled with, a long history of cancer, many generations, all kinds of cancers, kind of brain cancer, breast cancer, soft tissue cancers, kind of leukemia, just about everything. And they did a study, and they published a paper. The paper came out in 1969. And they said, we can't be sure what's going on here, but maybe there is something familial, maybe there's something hereditary. Now, of course, put yourself back into the 1960s. The understanding of cancer and the causes of cancer were much more limited than today, and very little was known about hereditary cancer. And so a lot of the experts at the time, remember, these two doctors were young newcomers relatively to the National Cancer Institute. And a lot of the experts said, we just don't think you're right, because these cancers are unrelated. How could they be, kind of caused by something that's the same, like a hereditary cancer? Or maybe it's something that is environmental, and you just haven't been able to figure out what the environmental cause was. Alternatively, maybe it was a virus that caused it. At the time, there was a belief that most cancers were caused by viruses. In fact, some are, but not most cancers. And a lot of the research was going into viruses. And finally, they said, you know what? There are more than 100 million families in the US. The odds are that some families are going to have a lot of cancers. So this could be just random chance. And so it was really fascinating, kind of they came into, kind of a lot of skepticism. I won't say opposition. I think I'll say skepticism. But they weren't deterred. They thought, let's keep following these families and families like them. And indeed, they followed them and did study after study. And each study they did, they found a continued high rate of cancer, far higher than the overall population. And so it took more than 20 years. And this is what I think you're referring to. It took till 1990 before they actually found a specific mutation that was causing these cancers. And it was in a particular gene. The body has more than 20,000 genes. It was in a particular gene called P53.
Hi, I'm Courtney Rice, a genetic counselor and director of precision medicine at TriHealth. We now know that cancer develops when normal cells turn into cancerous ones due to harmful changes or mutations in the DNA of those cells. These mutations can be inherited from a parent or acquired over a person's lifetime. A gene is a small section of DNA that gives instructions to cells. One important gene is TP53, which helps prevent cancer. It tells cells to make a protein called P53, which acts like a watchdog for the cell because of its critical role in preventing and correcting damage in the DNA. When DNA is harmed by things like UV light or chemicals, P53 helps fix it or pause cell division to allow repairs. If the damage is too severe, P53 can trigger the cell to self-destruct, preventing the spread of faulty cells. If the TP53 gene is mutated, the P53 protein may not work properly. This means damaged cells can keep dividing, which can lead to cancer. In fact, TP53 mutations are found in about 50% of all cancers. Some people inherit TP53 mutations, which then is called Li-Fraumeni syndrome, a rare condition that increases the risk of several cancers at a young age. Li-Fraumeni syndrome is one example of a hereditary cancer syndrome where genetic mutations are passed through families. Genetic testing can help people detect hereditary cancers, better understand their cancer risk, and make informed choices about cancer prevention and screening.
Now you've seen sort of an overview of how TP53 works. And what we're very interested in, Larry, now from this perspective, it's now we know that a lot of cancers have genetic alterations. And this is a thing that I use with many of my patients. All cancer is genetic, but not all cancer is inherited. Meaning that there's some
distinction.
Yeah, right. It's hard to, but in that situation that the cancer, something happened in the genetic information, either in that specific cell where the cancer is, or like in your case, something was passed down in the family that then gave some sort of potential to develop a cancer. And then we know that also how we live our lives and then some environmental exposures, all of that play in together to develop a cancer. But here we are with something that's a very clear genetic alteration that changes the normal cells in your family members into cancerous cells. So what I really want to talk about is you're now learning about this. This is in the 90s. Can you give us from when we knew P53 was really the cause of the gene that caused in your family and when you actually found out? And then I sort of want to go your thoughts on that and how that impacted you.
So again, it was at the time they first discovered it, it was considered very rare, kind of really, and it was huge news, by the way, kind of New York Times front page, Wall Street Journal had a big story, it was the cover of Science magazine. This was like a momentous discovery because it helped broaden the understanding of hereditary cancers and cancers in general. Now, I was a journalist, a senior editor at the Wall Street Journal. So was my brother. And for some reason, we miss these stories. And you kind of say, how could that have happened? Well, again, we had this theory about why the cancers were occurring in our. So we weren't like focusing on all this stuff about heredity. And in fact, another thing I think why some doctors didn't suggest initially, oh, boy, you seem to fit this pattern, is that our mother was the first in, kind of our family that had cancer. There was not a long history of cancer like there was in some of the families that were the subject of the studies by doctors Fraumeni and Lee. And so kind of, how could that be? And I'm sure you could explain that better. But what I was told is that, kind of a lot of these mutations are inherited, but like 5 to 10% of them are what are called de novo mutations. They're new. So that when you're conceived, the point of conception, you are born, kind of with the mutation. It's a little bit like when you're conceived, you're born with, kind of the genes that'll mean that your eyes are brown or blue. So that was another reason that we didn't kind of think a lot about heredity as the cause of all these cancers. And, kind of the many doctors that treated my brother and his son, these were the cancers after. Nobody knew when my sisters died before it was discovered. Nobody ever suggested, oh, by the way, there is something heredity until 2014. And I remember distinctly, I was at my desk at work, and my brother called me and said, my doctor has told me that he thinks I should get tested for a genetic mutation. It's in a gene called P53, something I'd never heard of. I actually jotted down a note to myself about it because I was intrigued by it and had never heard of it. And he said it's a gene that usually stops cancers from occurring, but when it's mutated, it loses a lot of its cancer-fighting powers. Well, sure enough, he got tested and was positive. And, he said, I'm relieved. I now know kind of what this is. When you've had all this in your family for such a long time and don't know, it's hard to figure out. So he actually said he was relieved. And about a year later, I got tested. I didn't rush out. I probably should have, but, I was in my 60s at the time. And I thought, I don't know. I've never had any cancer, so maybe I don't have anything to worry about. And sure enough, I was negative. So there's a 50-50 chance that you can inherit a mutation. And I did not. So that meant that, my risk of cancer was the same as everybody in the population. Whereas my brother, my sisters, my mother, my nephew, their risk was very high. In fact, by age 40, the chance of getting cancer if you have Li-Fraumeni syndrome, the P53 inherited mutation, is 50% versus 5% in the population as a whole. So, it's really staggering. So it took all that period of time. And I think that just, one of the reasons I wrote the book, Dr. Marr, is I wanted to raise awareness. I think even among doctors, there was not a huge amount of awareness of Li-Fraumeni syndrome and P53 because it was so rare. Unlike, say, BRCA, which is much more common. And I think, most doctors would be quite aware of BRCA and a lot of people, in the general population, much less so Li-Fraumeni syndrome and the P53 mutation.
Yeah, some of the strategies, for recommendations for the screening and that, I think part of that, you sort of hit on this a little bit. There was that lag of 20 some years before you heard about it, although you're in the midst of the news cycle and you're missing it.
Yes, right.
Which, if anyone should know about, you should know about it. But that was missed. I think part of our issue too and this is something as a physician and particularly one who has an area of precision medicine and, genetic risk and all that is sort of my bailiwick, that's not in our training. So how would you envision the future of cancer care and I'm really talking about preventing cancer care, how are we going to help other patients navigate with their hereditary risk if we're really not training our healthcare providers to do that?
Well, I think that it comes down to informing, patients and families, particularly those high-risk families, that something can be done. And that you're lucky. 30 years ago, nothing could be done or little could be done. You wouldn't know whether you had that or not. And so families kind of went through, one cancer after another, different generations, different kinds of cancers often. And, we're lucky to, in a way, live when we do now because of the advances that have been made and that you can take advantage of that. And you know what? Going forward another 10 years, 20 years, we're going to continue to make those kinds of that kind of progress, and it's going to help. You're going to turn your back on that. I mean, I think it's just, it's so important that you recognize how fortunate we are to benefit from this tireless research, which took years and years and years to confirm this and to understand it. And now we have it. I mean, I did talk to some physicians who were involved in that research. Dr. Judy Garber, who I know has been, another speaker at Richard Smith Symposium. And she said that after they first learned about the Li-Fraumeni syndrome and the P53 mutation, when she found, some patients did not want to be tested. And she said, what? We've worked all this time. This is what we kind of have devoted our lives to do, to helping you. And we can't help you unless you kind of undergo testing yourself. And I can imagine how difficult it is for a physician to be in a position to be able to help, but then kind of not kind of get the cooperation of a family to really help.
What have you seen that has looked promising to you? And how do you think our understanding, our relationship to that, going forward?
One of the things that surprised me, Dr. Marr, is how much progress has been made in the treatment of certain types of cancers in the past 2 or 3 decades, which, I really was unaware of. I mean, a lot of people think of cancer as a death sentence, and there are certain types of cancers that really are difficult to treat now, and the survival rates are pretty short. Kind of, for example, as you know, certain types of brain cancers or pancreatic cancer. But a lot of cancers, kind of breast cancer, lung cancer, bone cancers, the targeted therapies have really dramatically improved the outcome. I kind of now, kind of the 5-year, 10-year survival rate of these cancers is often in the 80 or 90%, double of what it was, kind of 20, 30 years ago. I mean, that's remarkable.
I think Dr. Sharpless was 4 or 5 times ago the head of the National Cancer Institute, and he said, what I'm learning is that cancer is not one disease, but it's thousands of diseases. Just because you have a single gene that causes it, how that gene is mutated or changed over time can be a myriad of ways, and that can be all different ways that we have to approach it. So I think as time goes on and we learn more, we're going to learn that this plethora of diseases we call cancer is something that we need to focus on holistically instead of just individually one gene at a time. So,
hi, I'm Courtney Rice. I am a genetic counselor by training and the director of precision medicine at TriHealth. I've been at TriHealth for 14 years and a genetic counselor for 17 years. From a healthcare provider standpoint, you mentioned something earlier, just finding the time. Your doctor had mentioned it to you, your brother had shared information, and then it just became finding time and knowing how to engage with the system to accomplish that, ordering that test, because it's not something that every physician would be able to explain thoroughly and know how to order. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I think if you don't understand enough about it, you kind of don't have any urgency. And I think the value of genetic counseling is if I had talked to a genetic counselor and that genetic counselor said, you know what, even though you haven't had cancer, you might have that mutation and you might have passed that mutation on to your children. That would have given me a deeper understanding and, kind of led to an urgency. And so I guess what I wish I had done, looking back, is talk to a genetic counselor and get, kind of some advice on, so why does this matter to me, someone who doesn't have cancer, even though cancer is in my family?
Take me to the time where you received the results of your test result. You received that information from your physician and your genetic counselor. And there must have been a moment where you're thinking, how do I share this information with my children, with my brother? And how did you go about doing that?
So, I think it was, that's a great question. I think it was easy to share it with my children, because with my children, it's like you don't have anything to worry about, or at least you don't have to worry about having inherited this specific gene. It's a little bit trickier to kind of share the information with my brother, because again, kind of he was on his like 5th or 6th cancer at that time, kind of, for 20 years, kind of cancer had been ever present in his life, even before then, because his son had cancer, kind of at age 2, and then again at age 30, and then the last cancer at 39. So I think it was, kind of a little bit difficult to, kind of say, what do I do? I was living in Los Angeles at the time. He was living in London. And so the time difference was such that I just sent him an email instead of calling him, because that was going to be tricky. I didn't know if he'd be traveling or whatever. And again, kind of, I think it was helped by the fact that we had a very close relationship, and we'd lost all our family. We were our last. I mean, we have our own families, but we were our last, kind of our immediate family that we grew up with. We were the last two. So we were very close. And so, kind of, there was a little bit of trepidation, but I wasn't too worried about his reaction. And his reaction was so, kind of uplifting, great news. Kind of, he was happy for me that I didn't have this and that I couldn't pass this on to my own children. And I know that's hard. I've seen, and I've talked to people in families, kind of where siblings have felt angry that they got it and their children got it. And, kind of, why didn't you? And I understand that. And that's why I really felt so lucky.
Very close to your brother, and that comes through in the stories that you share. And I remember reading the part where he responded, "Great news," and was, very, just as relieved as you were, it sounded like.
Yeah.
And I imagine as you were interviewing other families and researching the book, that maybe other families were able to share varying responses, and that too is something to think about prior to undergoing testing of, if you learn one result versus another result, a plan for how an individual might share that with a family. Are there any other tips that you learned or themes that you learned from the families that you talked about where relatives were grappling with a decision on, number one, should I undergo testing, and then how do I communicate that to other family members?
You go back to the 1990s when, kind of, they first learned of the mutation. And some families knew that it was in their family, but they didn't know exactly, kind of in the latest generation who had. Some of them decided not to be tested then. And I was like, really? Kind of, I was surprised at that. And the reaction was, well, the reason they said that you can't do anything about it anyway. If you have that mutation, there's nothing, whether it's a treatment, even if there wasn't screening back then that you could do, kind of. And I get that, I totally get that, which is very different from, kind of what Dr. Meyer and I have been discussing, which is that now there is a lot. First of all, the treatments have improved and the screening can spot the cancers early. So when I've talked to, there's really been a generational change. I mean, it's not everybody, but I think that, if you go back to that period of time, kind of people said, kind of, why should I get tested? It's just going to cause me a lot of pain and grief, and I'm going to be worried all the time that I have it. And you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So, kind of screw that, kind of. And now it has changed. One of the things, Courtney, that I say, and I don't know if this is for everybody, and it can help everybody. I've been asked a number of times, do you have survivor's guilt? I mean, kind of, I lost my sisters at 24 and 32, my mother at 42, kind of my brother had, he died at 69. He had not as long a life as he wanted, but he had a long and full life. So that's different. But I've asked if I have survivor's guilt. And one of the things I say is, I don't think so, or not much. And I don't know if this might help people. If I had a choice, if it was God said, it's going to be you or your siblings, you can decide who gets the mutation and who doesn't. If I had a choice and said them, not me, there would be, kind of, yes, there'd be kind of reason for guilt. It's random. It's statistical, kind of a statistic, 50-50 chance, kind of, I had no say. It's genetics. It was a lottery. I didn't have a chance. And so what I try to tell people is, kind of, yes, feel bad, feel sad, kind of feel heartbroken over what's happened to your family if they've got the mutation and you don't. But, don't feel too guilty because you didn't have a say in that.
When there's cancer diagnosed in a family member, and then in your case, you shared how you were a witness to how your family were diagnosed and went through their treatment. And you explained how there were times in between cancer diagnoses. And I'm just curious on how did you, what were the tactics that you used to support your family members in between cancer diagnoses? And I guess looking back, we know when there's the period in between one cancer and then being diagnosed again or having another close relative diagnosed. In the moment, you didn't know. All you knew was there was a diagnosis in a relative. And how are you present? How are you there for your family at those moments? And I think that is just very relatable to almost every individual has a connection to cancer in some way.
Yeah, I think it starts with being present at the worst moments. So, kind of when my brother had his first cancer, I was actually living in London and he was living in New York at the time. And, I just got on a plane and kind of said, okay, let me be there. I want to be there for your surgery. I want to be there to support, you and your wife. And every time there's been like a subsequent, kind of diagnosis for him, I always tried to be there for him for the surgery and all. And I think that's really, really important. There's nothing like that, kind of personal in the room, kind of I'm here for you. And we've all felt that. The in-between times, it's how are you doing? Are you getting tested? Are you going back? Because we all know that cancers, can metastasize. They can spread. And the more vigilant you are, the better you can be to identify, a recurrence early and, beat it again. And so I think that, as a family member, again, I've never had cancer, so I've never had to go through this myself. Just, make sure you're constantly asking there, what can I do for you? How can I help you? Are you doing the kind of treatment that you need? And also understanding the anxiety that people with these inherited syndromes go through when they go through screening. So I've talked to so many people who, the day before their MRI, the annual MRI, if you have LFS, they can't sleep. They can't think of anything. It's like, am I going to get another cancer? Where am I going to get another cancer? Or am I going to get, another, year cancer-free, be blessed with that. And so if you recognize that, you've got your annual screening coming up. What can I do for you? Try to do something that is going to make them, maybe for a moment forget, because we know you can't really make them forget. It's there, and I think you have to be honest about that too. I'm sorry that you're having to go through this. I think, I have to be hopeful. I have to be hopeful for these families. Remember, if you have this mutation, it's not a matter of if you're going to get cancer. It's a matter of when and where and how many times. I mean, that's a terrible thing to have to carry along. And so, I think that the advances, even if they're halting, and we know that that's the way science works, is the one thing that can give hope to these families. Maybe it's not going to help my generation, but maybe it's going to help my children.
Again, Larry, we want to thank you for the impact that this book has had, not only on all of us here personally at TriHealth, but also on the many other people that I know you've had interactions with. I do have a couple quotes here from people that sent you emails, letters, etc., regarding your book. And let me read one, and I want to sort of have you give us how this impacts you and reflects on you. This person says, quote, "I spend hours reading medical publications, most of which go way over my head to search for answers or hope. Of all the time I've spent on this topic, though, your book has meant the most. You gave life, memories, and a story to all the people this genetic mutation has impacted. You brought people's stories in to convey what medical journals cannot. More importantly, you show how this diagnosis impacts more than just the individual diagnosed, but every family member and friend that has been witness to it. I'm so hopeful Your book will continue to shed light on this genetic mutation, and we will see significant progress in our lifetimes. Your thought?
You know, Dr. Marr, I almost tear up when you read that to me. I did, one of the things I wanted to do when writing this book is increase awareness. I also wanted to pay tribute to the doctors who worked so hard and long to solve this, and of course, to honor my family. But I'm especially touched, that it has meant so much to people like that, people I've never met. And, when I get that, I say, yeah, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to kind of help these people realize they're not alone. The pain that you have is pain that other people have had, and there is hope. We can't know when, but if you look at the long arc of progress of science, and if you look at the progress of, understanding of Lee-Fraumeni syndrome and genetic hereditary cancer conditions, you see that it has been substantial. And I'm really, kind of moved when I get letters like that, because in the end, that's really what this was all about.
I think the key for me as I read it is you humanized the research process. As a physician, we talk about the patient journey. We talk about the focus needs to be on the patient. But so much of what we have to learn to do before we even get to the patient, I think in some regards, dehumanizes the process. So thank you for shedding light, which to me was really humanizing the whole process of that. And I pray too that we'll see that significant progress in our lifetimes for all those. So I want to thank you for.
I am in awe of the researchers who did this, and I am in awe of the doctors who devote themselves to cancer patients, because it's difficult, it's hard, especially those who devote themselves to pediatric cancer patients, children with cancer. It is, kind of really, kind of something that moves me deeply.
Well, thank you again for this book. We appreciate it.
Did you know TriHealth is launching a community health research program called DNA Discovery with TriHealth? The goal of this program is to improve access to personalized health care and to support new research discoveries. DNA Discovery with TriHealth offers genetic screening for certain cancers and a cause of heart disease. Participants will have the option to create an account with our partner Helix, where they can learn about genetic, regional ancestry, and traits like caffeine sensitivity and sleep patterns. There is no cost to participate, and health insurance is not required. Participation in this research program is voluntary and confidential. To be eligible, you must be 18 years or older and have not had a bone marrow or stem cell transplant from a donor. At this time, you must have a TriHealth medical record to participate. Enrolling in the study is simple. To learn more, visit trihealth.com/DNA Discovery or use the QR code on the screen to get started today.